بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
الحمد لله رب العالمين صلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, and welcome to Islamic Oasis Live. In the last few weeks and days, brothers and sisters, we have been constantly talking about Syria. We're bringing different activists, authors, scholars, talking about the changes that are taking place in Syria, how this change is occurring, and is it change, is it not change, trying to understand the situation in Syria and trying to understand our role. Of course, there has been a lot of discussions with something that, it has been, the revolution has gone on for almost 12 years. And then within 12 days, the rebels reached Damascus and take over Damascus. Of course, there's a lot of questions in mind of the people. How does this happen? Of course, we saw that in Bangladesh also. A few days, Hasina is removed. We saw that in Afghanistan. 20 years of war, and finally there's a deal, and within days, Taliban are sitting in Kabul. There is a phenomenon. There is something going on. Someone has figured out how to work with these revolts and how they made sure that things happen also during the spring, the Arab Spring, for instance. So today we have our brother Sharif. Inshallah, we have had him here many times. He's also, I'm sure you've seen his videos on Political Alchemy. He's out there. He's talking. A lot of people have a lot, and they have a lot of trust in what the brother has to say. And so we wanted to bring him on and have trying to get certain clarifications on what the assessments of the brothers in the know-how is in Sham. So, dear brother Sharif, welcome to Islamic Oasis Live.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah to yourself and to all the viewers.
Walaikum salam.
So, alhamdulillah, obviously the last few weeks have been an absolutely immense change for the Muslim Ummah. To think about that, at the beginning or sort of 30th or the 27th of November when it started, operations started happening within Aleppo, to think that within a week or so, Bashar Assad would fall, there'd be a completely new reality in Syria was something unthinkable, just going back a couple of weeks ago. It took everybody by surprise in regards to this. But I think what it shows to us, it shows the steadfastness of the Muslims, particularly the Muslims of Syria and Bilad al-Sham. How for 13 years under such oppression, they still stuck in terms of their agenda, which was to try to remove Bashar al-Assad. Now, I understand there are external factors in play. There are external actors and influences that also facilitated the situation that we're seeing today. And there's dangers. And I think there's probably two fundamental dangers that we can see. The first one is that we create a situation, or Syria becomes a situation like Libya, factionalism, sectarianism, and violence throughout the country. And it sort of balkanizes, it separates into different fighting regions led by various warlords. So that's one danger. There's also a second danger, and the danger is that of Western influence within the region, because the West has this idea of hegemony, which is this idea of exerting control and influence, not just in the Muslim world, but around the world, and particularly within the Muslim world. And so when we look at the liberation that the Muslims achieved from Bashar al-Assad, there's also another liberation that needs to take place, because there's like there's two layers to this. There's a liberation from the tyrants that are currently existing in the Muslim lands, but there's also a liberation from Western dominance that exists upon our Muslim lands. And so we shouldn't think to ourselves that Bashar al-Assad's gone, that's the end of it. That's not an end in itself. That's just simply a means to a greater end. And so maybe, inshallah, we can explore regards to what that means in terms of the greater ends and what it means to liberate from Western hegemonic control over the Muslim lands.
Sheikh, it's maybe shocking or even confusing. Sheikh, 13 years of such horrendous crimes against the Muslims, of actually to be honest, 55 years, uh, i- if not longer, with everything else behind before Hafiz al-Assad came. Uh, Sheikh, I mean, do we not learn lessons? Are we just bad at learning lessons? I mean, because if you look at everything that's happening now as we speak in Syria, some may actually say it could just be a phase change. Uh, you know, because I mean, it's there's some things happening now. It's very sad, Sheikh, which could very well lead to a bloody situation within Syria again. I mean,
Yeah.
look, because I don't, Russians are being told to leave. Of course, that's this situation going on with the Americans. There's back and forth going on. The Turks are on with the Americans. It looks like Iran is still not just willing to leave. Iraq is still hot and could be utilized in Syria. Israel is over 300 some airstrikes. Sheikh, I mean, was this change bought in for this, or was it forced upon the Americans to make a quick decision?
Okay. So I think with America, we need to firstly understand, was Bashar al-Assad somebody who was anti-Western, anti-Zionist? Because if we answer this question one way, we get a particular view of the reality. If we answer it another way, we'll understand it in a different way as well. Some people, they like to project Bashar al-Assad as somebody who was anti-Western, anti-Zionist. The reality is that people like Bashar al-Assad, and before him Hafiz al-Assad, his father, and before him other people from the Ba'athist regimes like Gamal Abdel Nasser, the rhetoric of anti-Westernism or anti-Israel was that it was rhetoric. It was shallow and it was hollow, and it was done in order to pacify their own, population, to say, look, we're standing up against America, support us. And secondly, it was a tool to use to attack any critique of their regime. So what they would say is anybody who was critical of their regime, they would say these are Zionist backed, these are Western agents. So they would use this simply as a tool. The reality was, whether it was Hafiz al-Assad or Bashar al-Assad, is that the West was intimately involved, particularly America was intimately involved with these regimes. Yeah, we know, for example, what's happened in the prisons of Syria, the torture
Sadaya, yeah,
that's
sure.
taken place is absolutely shocking. But this was also a CIA black site. America and the CIA would use Syria and its relations with Bashar al-Assad and Syrian intelligence to render what they call extraordinary rendition, which is basically taking somebody from another country, from a third country, taking them to Syria in order to get tortured, in order to extract information. And there was number of individuals, one particular individual, his name was Maher Arar, who was a Syrian-born Canadian national who was taken off a flight that was going back to his home in Canada by the CIA, and then he was rendered, basically kidnapped, to Syria, where he was tortured. And I think it was Sardania prison, in fact, was the area. Wallahu alam. But it was one of the key sites, and it was in front of CIA operatives. Now, CIA is not going to deal with somebody who's seen as quote-unquote anti-Western and who is truly anti-Western. No, they wouldn't. They only deal with these people because they know that they have a certain relationship. In fact, this goes back further. During Gulf War 2003, CIA and America used Bashar al-Assad to spy upon Al-Qaeda and some of the Iraqi insurgency groups, used them to police the border between Syria and Iraq. So, there's this relationship that's existed. And so Bashar al-Assad was not seen as a anti-Western person that America wanted to get rid of. In fact, in 2011, when Hillary Clinton, she was the Secretary of State, she said that Congress, US Congress, believes that Bashar al-Assad is a reformer. So Bashar al-Assad at that time, he was always, after in 2000 when he became the president after Hafiz al-Assad died, he was presented as this Western educated, he's educated in London. He was a British doctor.
Right. I remember that, actually.
His wife was from King's
he
College,
might be
London.
the reformist. That's true.
That's right.
The new UK educated. Yeah.
Exactly. So they were trying to present him as though he was a modern Arab leader. He wasn't this old dictator. Why were they doing that? Because they were trying to preserve him and his regime. And so America didn't look at Bashar al-Assad as somebody antagonistic to their interest in the same way Israel didn't see Bashar al-Assad as antagonistic to their interest. In fact, former IDF, army generals and former chief of army staffs for Israel all said that Bashar al-Assad is better than the alternative when the uprisings took place. Yeah, they said that yes, we have this as an quote unquote enemy, but he's a weak enemy. Yeah, in fact, further people, from the intelligence services of the Zionist entity would say that we have already the skies are open to us in Syria because we had an agreement with the Russians that we could operate in Syria as and when we pleased, basically. So there was this agreement, and Bashar al-Assad, and I'm sure it's mentioned many times before, but Bashar al-Assad for over 50 years didn't didn't engage in any action to try to liberate the Golan Heights. Yeah, that was taken in 1967. So since Hafiz al-Assad, around about 1973, since 71 he came into power, since 1973, for over 50 years, Golan Heights has effectively been, left and given to Israel. And so Israel were happy with that. The West was happy with that. He was seen as a stable reformer. In fact, Tony Blair, on the death of Hafiz al-Assad in 2000, released a statement saying that he was a stabilizing force in the Middle East and much respected amongst the Arab world. This is not somebody you'd say who is seen as an enemy, who's seen as somebody antagonistic to your interests. So he wasn't. He never was. The regime wasn't. And so when the uprisings took place, they had three potential, scenarios that they were looking for. The favored one was to keep Bashar al-Assad in power. Yeah. The second one is that if Bashar al-Assad couldn't stay in power, power-sharing government between Bashar al-Assad and the quote-unquote moderate rebel forces. And the third one was to create a moderate, if they couldn't maintain their power sharing, then to create a moderate, rebel force that could take power completely. Those were the three scenarios. Now, for a long period of time, none of those scenarios bore fruit. Bashar al-Assad couldn't maintain power and control over Syria. So that was out of the question because he had lost all respect. He had lost all confidence. He had lost, the people of Syria. They didn't want him in power. They couldn't create a moderate force because the ground realities were that these were people who were Islamic, who wanted to call for an Islamic change and didn't want to negotiate power with Bashar al-Assad. Then when Bashar al-Assad in August last year, and he was readmitted to the Arab League in 2023, August, about that time, he thought he'd won. He thought he didn't need to engage in any negotiations with the Syrian rebels or the resistance movements. He thought he'd won the situation. And so in that situation, what you had is these three potential scenarios. Now, I don't believe, and Allah knows best, I don't believe they've achieved any of those three scenarios, the Americans. They are trying to achieve the third one, which is to create a moderate force that will adhere to the rules that they have set. Yeah. And that's where the danger is. Now, the reason why I say that they haven't achieved that yet, because there's lots of debate and discussion about Abu Muhammad al-Julani, is he somebody who can be trusted, etc., etc. The reality on the ground is that even amongst HTS fighters and amongst other factions, there are sincere Islamic people who are not interested in going back to the old ways of adhering to Western or American hegemonic control over the region. Yeah. So I don't think that's the situation. And in fact, the analysis that I got from brothers on the ground in Syria prior to the removal of Bashar al-Assad was that even though Turkey, who is obviously a NATO ally, so therefore within the quote-unquote Western Bloc, that even though they had pushed HTS and some of these aligned factions to go against Bashar al-Assad, they didn't do it because they wanted to remove Bashar al-Assad, but they wanted to push Bashar al-Assad to negotiate into a final settlement agreement, which would have been this coalition government. But Bashar al-Assad at the time was not interested, and so Turkey, Erdogan, who's worried about a creation of a Kurdish state, on its own borders, because obviously it has its own issues with regards to Kurds within Turkey, creation of a Kurdish state in Syria would basically give legitimacy for the Kurds in Turkey to say, well, we want to be part of that Kurdish state. And it would also be a transit route to allow to arm Kurdish separatist movements within Turkey as well for a Kurdish state. So they don't want that. So they want a final settlement. However, what happened was that sincere Muslims pushed HTS and other groups in order to go further than just simply the rural areas around Aleppo, but actually into Aleppo. And then this gave rise to groups in Homs and other areas to rise up because they were inspired by it. Now, Wallahu alam, Allah knows best. Maybe it's the case that the writing was on the wall and America thought they'd move quickly to remove Bashar Assad. But the reality remains, without external support, so without Russian support and without Hizbul Iran, the party in Iran, their support within Syria, Bashar al-Assad would have fallen many, many years earlier. He would have probably fallen in 2012, because there was debates. So I'm just saying is that he had no support. His days were already numbered. Bashar al-Assad's days were already numbered. He literally could not sustain and create any sort of stability and power over that region, even over the regions that he controlled, like Damascus, because of what we have seen. And even his Alawi support base themselves had lost heart, and were wondering, why are we sending our sons to die for Bashar al-Assad? So he had no support, and so the situation became untenable. And I think what we're now seeing is various groups and various countries trying to scramble in order to control the region. And in that, there is an opportunity to create real change within that region.
Sheikh, why HTS? Why not? If you're talking about moderate rebel groups, I'm sure they could have found. It could be maybe because HTS was the most organized one. I'm not sure, but why, in your assessment, why HTS? Why not somebody, if they're going to try to secularize anyway, why not choose another let's say more secular Free Syrian Army to present it rather than HTS?
Because I don't think any of the secular groups would have any traction. You need somebody who's seen and perceived as Islamic. They try to use
you think? You think so? I think people would have taken FSA. They would have they're running around with the FSA flag anyway at the end of the day.
Well, yes, but originally the FSA didn't have that same level of traction as groups like Jabhat al-Nusra, which now became HTS, and other factions on the ground. They didn't have that traction. And the reason why they didn't have that traction was because they weren't seen as Islamic. They were seen as nationalists who had become disaffected with some, quote unquote, some Islamic elements with regards to it. So I think they needed that Islamic, they just didn't have that. Now, HTS, obviously we can debate, and there's lots of things that even I don't know. So I'm not going to be here to talk about some of the key specifics, realities of HTS. But we do know that they were having certain level of relationships and funding that was taking place with Turkey. We know that was the case. And we know that comes with strings and conditions attached. And so, with an Islamic background that they had, with the fact that the fighters themselves, many of them were seen as sincere and had sincerity in terms of what they were trying to achieve, all of this meant that they had the ability to utilize a more quote-unquote Islamic friendly crowd in order to try to remove Bashar al-Assad and have that traction. Again, like I said, I don't think in origin they were looking to remove Bashar al-Assad. They were looking for a negotiated coalition government with Bashar al-Assad in order to create a final settlement solution. But obviously things moved forward too fast, and the fact that Bashar al-Assad just simply does not have any, ground support within that region.
Sheikh, I guess it's always good to look at other models here. Even when it seems that even when Taliban were brought in power 3.5 years ago or so, it didn't seem that they were ready to take power. I don't even think they thought that they would be sitting in Kabul. And all of a sudden, they're sitting in Kabul. You find the same situation here with these guys. With even Ikhwan Muslimin, you see that all of a sudden they're sitting in Cairo and they're disheveled, disorganized, not sure what to do. let's take money from IMF, this, that, and the other, which I really think is already going to happen in Syria very soon. I mean, the money is coming from all over. Saudi is, I think they're offering billions. Even, when you speak to people on the ground, they're saying that, look, man, it's so much money coming in now that's being offered by all, Western, Eastern, Northern, Southern governments that, so Sheikh, I mean, it was the dirty money that destroyed the revolution in the beginning anyway, right? I mean, different factions were bought out and things like that, and that's what we're seeing here again, except now there is a government, and they may be kind of shown as people who are going to rebuild Syria. Can the Muslims of Syria be fooled again, Sheikh?
Yeah, so this is why I said, Sheikh, that we have to think about this from two perspectives when it comes to liberation. Liberation from a tyrant, liberation from Western hegemony.
That I understand. Look, and liberation from Bashar, I got it. Prisons are being freed, I got it. Sadnaya is now free of 150,000 people. I saw that. Look, I understand what was happening in these nasty, these prisons. This was horrific, horrendous. It was beyond explanation. I understand that. But what I'm asking is that the people of Syria, with what they have gone through, do you think that they will see through the game that is being played in this region again?
Well, this is what I'm saying. This is why we have to educate ourselves, isn't it? Whether it's our Muslims in Syria or whether it's Muslims globally, which is that where the real problem is, where's the root cause of this problem? And I know it's very easy for us to talk about this sitting in the comfort of where we are, but we still have to have that conversation, because the problem of Bashar Assad, or the problem of Sisi, or the problem of Mohammed bin Salman, or the problem of Zionism are fundamentally one problem. They're not separate issues. It is because of Western colonial and neo-colonial policies. If we look at and study how is it that a minority, that the Alawites were able to get to power within a predominantly Sunni country, and we know, some of the things that the Alawites, the Nusayris as they used to be known as, what they believe in is clear-cut kufr. It's not even like, ikhtilafi. It's, believing that Ali radiallahu anh was God incarnate, was course. God on earth, is clear-cut kufr. Nobody's going to deny that. Whether you're Sunni or Shia, you're going to accept that. Nobody's going to accept that. So how is it that it got into that power? How is it that the area that was originally known as Bilad al-Sham, and Sheikh, Bilad al-Sham means Syria, Jordan, Palestine. So it's true, isn't it?
Yeah, of course.
How is it now become Syria, Jordan, and a Zionist entity? That's controlling Palestine. Because we had the Sykes-Picot Agreement after World War I, where they literally drew the lines in the sand to say, this is Jordan, this is Syria, this is Iraq. And, if we understand a little bit of our history, and it's important, this is not academic, because this is what we're living through, the ramifications of this today. But when we look at this situation and we look at the, Sharif Hussein who was the custodian of Mecca at the time, when he made his secret agreement with the British in order to rebel against the Uthmani Khilafah, and then his sons became the leaders of Jordan. So King Abdullah became the first became the leader of Jordan, and King Faisal originally was installed as the leader of Syria, his other son. But then the French didn't want him because the French had mandate rule within that region, so they kicked him out. So what did the British do? They gifted him Iraq. So they created the environment, they created the society, and they literally drew the lines in the sand. So if you look at I'm always shocked and amazed by this, but when you look at the map of Syria and Jordan, and you see a line, Sheikh, you've seen this line, and it's literally by a ruler, this line. It's so straight. It's a ruler line that they've done. Now, why is it? This is what I want people to think about. Why is it that the Zionist entity can violate sovereignty, to violate the idea of these, country, nation states? Why is it on the same day that Bashar Assad is removed from power, you have America bombing targets in Syria? They can violate it as they please. Why is it that America is able to have its base within Syria, controlling, on the border of Jordan, Syria, and Iraq, controlling that region? But why is it that we as Muslims, when we look at the problem of Syria and we talk about stability in Syria, we're just thinking Syria and that literal line that was drawn by the Sykes-Picot Agreement, by the British and the French generals. Why are we thinking like this? I was thinking, and people again can turn around and say I'm being very naive and disagree with me. Fine, I can accept that. But I was thinking, what if the Syrian revolutionaries and resistance movements moved it across the border into Jordan to remove King Abdullah II? What if they remove the regime there? Because everybody's talking about stability, the stability of Syria.
No, go ahead.
Sorry. I didn't know if I've frozen then. So my screen froze a little bit.
No.
So they talk about the stability of Syria and the stability of trying to maintain this and the fact that it's a weak state. Well, one of the ways a state becomes strong is by expanding its borders.
Is that a general principle, Sheikh, in general? I mean, is that because the reason I'm saying that is that we had one of the brothers a few days ago on the show, and he gave an example which was very interesting. He said, look, when the Americans started, America was first 13 colonies, and then colonies were very separated. There were different colonies run by different kind of, it wasn't one federal, government. And then they decided that they are going to unite. They basically, meaning different states came together, united under a federal government. When you look at the Muslim world like that, if the Muslim, let's say, rebels were to do that, would not be a new thing in history, would it?
Yeah, but the difference is that the leaderships, the rebel leaderships within America under the British colonial rule at that time, they were unified in terms of their objectives. Now, when we have the situation of Jordan and we have the King Abdullah, who is the Hashemite kingdom was created literally by the British. Britain literally created the borders of Jordan in the same way they created the borders of Iraq, in the same way the French created the borders of Syria and Lebanon. They created these things not because they wanted to administer them. They created them with one particular purpose: to weaken the Muslim Ummah, to weaken them in such a way that they weren't able to unify their strength and their resources in order to be a threat to their interests in the region or globally ever again. This is the reason why they did this. So we need to understand that that's the reason why they created these states in the first place and the types of leaderships that they created. And therefore, this is what I'm saying that, look, one of the ways, if we're at a time where the whole of the Ummah are absolutely seething and angry, not just in, some parts of the Muslim world, across the Muslim world, in Jordan, you telling me that out of a population of 11 million, 5.5 million or so are Palestinians, that they're happy with their leadership. Everybody can see that they have betrayed, they have undertaken treachery against the Muslims, the Jordanian leadership, in terms of backing and siding with the Zionists, who are currently undertaking a genocide in Gaza. Yeah, they're committing the worst of worst crimes, the crimes of all crimes, which is the crime of genocide.
But can the rebels see this, Sheikh? I mean, I guess I'm trying to say that. Okay, so there's another. One of the things that we always see, Sheikh, is that the rebels, or whenever these type of rebellions do happen, the rebels don't seem to be. They don't seem to have the kind of understanding that is needed in order to achieve what needs to be done. And one can say, sure, some people, not everybody is going to be the intellectual, not everybody is going to be the person who is understanding the politics, all of those details. Majority of the people are like that. They don't understand the games and plans and plots and all that. But Sheikh, this is is that the nature of rebellion and in this, what we are saying, the nature of these types of rebellions are just emotional rebellions without having an end in mind? Or
Well, Sheikh, this is why we have to have this conversation. Whether we had this conversation 10 years ago or we're having the conversation now, we have to have this conversation, which is we have to say that actually America and the West will allow the Muslim world to operate so long as it operates according to the rules they set. And the rules they set, they violate consistently, whether that is in terms of international law, whether that is in terms of violating the sovereignty of other nations, whether that is the Zionist entity being given all the weapons and the political and moral and intellectual and financial support in order to invade further into Syria or into Lebanon or take West Bank and take Gaza. They're given all the support. The West imposes systems and then expects only the Muslims to adhere to those systems. Yeah? Only weak nations are meant to adhere to it.
Does it follow even the nation state model, Sheikh, that even the West, when you look at the United States, it's telling the whole world that it has to accept a nation state model. But is the United States a nation state?
Exactly, and it doesn't. This is my point. This is where the conversation needs to be in the mindset of the Muslims, because we're hearing a lot about Muslims talking about stability within Syria, about creating a space, and that's certainly important. I'm not saying that's not important. That's incredibly important. That's another path, which is to create the political space and development in order to then create the type of discussion and generate the ideas. That's one path. Another path is to say, actually, maybe we should be thinking about erasing the lines drawn by the French and the British colonialists after the First World War, and think about how to create unity, because we know every single Muslim, you ask any Muslim, what is a unity of the Muslim world a good thing? The vast majority of Muslims will say, yes, unity of the Muslim world is a good thing. We see this currently with regards to the issue of what's happening in Gaza. The Muslim world is over 2 billion population, has the largest amounts of oil reserves in the world, has the largest amounts of gas reserves in the world, has the largest copper and gold mine in the world, which is in Balochistan in Pakistan, in Pakistan has the recently discovered fourth largest gas reserves that are discovered off its shores within its territorial waters. We have 2 billion population, and if you add up the Muslim armies, we're talking an army in the excess of millions. And if you look at available manpower, we're talking about available manpower in the excess of hundreds of millions. So in that situation, as well as the fact that we are in the most geostrategically located area in the world, all shipping and trade routes go through the Muslim world, then the Muslims being unified seems like a no-brainer. Now, all I'm saying is this, is that we need to start putting this discussion on the map. We need to start saying, actually, that straight line that wasn't drawn by Muslims, wasn't, implemented by Muslims, wasn't an idea that Muslims came up with. And we're in a situation now where we've just removed a tyrant ruler whose family has ruled the country for over 50 years, who is a legacy of the colonial period of the British and the French, who was supported by the Americans, and he's been completely removed, that we're now in an opportunity, in a nexus event, where we can reshape and redraw the map of the Middle East and the Muslim world. And that's how we need to start thinking in that terms of vision. Otherwise, what's going to happen is we're going to confine ourselves in nation states and confine ourselves according to how to operate according to limited resources of one particular small nation state, as opposed to thinking, well, actually, Jordan's population is ready for exploding in terms of removing their rulers. Egypt is ready to explode in terms of
you can also already see the statements coming out of Sisi. Sisi is already making statements like, I don't have any blood on my hand. I didn't take anybody's money. It's crazy how he's talking already, which means he's seeing the end of Bashar, and maybe he's seeing himself there. But Sheikh, there's some very.
But that's what I'm saying, Sheikh.
I have to. There's some good points I need to get out of you to see what you're thinking here. I'm asking this to almost everybody that has come on the show talking about Syria for the last week, let's say week and a half even. Should HTS run the country? Meaning in one of the shows yesterday, I had Dr. Abu Talha on the show, and he said, look, no one should dirty themselves with this nonsense. Rather, they should say either Islam or I'm not going to be part of it. Fine, we did the work of removing Bashar. We freed the people. Syria today is free, but we're not going to bring it back into different types of chains again. So should HTS say we're not going to be part of this game? And if they do this, you could have a whole different faction that takes over. But then, I mean, how does this work, Sheikh? I mean, what choices do they have if they, on the ground right now? What?
But this is what I'm saying. I'm saying that, look, in terms of whether HTS are the ones that are going to take over, or should they take over, that's maybe, a separate point. I think the issue is that as Muslims, we need to have certain principles. The first principle has to be that any solution to the future of Syria, and generally for the Muslim world, but specifically Syria, has to be directed and fundamentally based upon Islam. Islamic governance is not a cherry on top idea. This term, putting the icing on the cake. It's the nice additional bit. It's the fundamental solution that's going to get us out of the quagmire that we're currently in. So that's the first principle. The second principle is to be aware that external Western countries, whether that's the EU, whether that's Britain, whether that's America, or their various organizations, are not designed to liberate the Muslim world, are not there to, they're not designed by principle in order to create independent, strong, thriving Islamic states, or Muslim countries. They're not done that. They're there to subjugate, they're there to manipulate, they're there to try to control the region further for their own interests, or for Zionist interests as well. This is we need to be very clear. Look, for the past year, over a year, we have seen unstinting support on a level we have never seen. We hear about it, we read about it, we've seen it in terms of clips, but for a whole year, the absolute utter devastation and destruction of Gaza and the amount of support, whether that's the British government, whether that's the American government, or whether that's various international institutions that have allowed implicitly or explicitly given to the Zionist entity to what it's done. The medical journal Lancet released a report. This was a few months ago. And in their report, they gave a conservative estimate of the number of people who were killed in Gaza. They were saying that the conservative estimates, those who were directly and indirectly killed due to the conflict, was over 186,000 people in Gaza. And that was a few months ago.
I think now they're saying 240,000.
Right. There you go. So this is the issue. So yes, there may have been currently, the medical health center in Gaza says around about 43,000. There's another 10 or 15,000 that are buried under rubble, missing, presumed dead, who are not counted. So the issue is that as Muslims, we need to stop thinking about what the West thinks, how this is perceived by the West. Because the reality is that they are absolutely happy to see hundreds of thousands of Muslims die if it serves their interest. They don't care. So why is it that we're constantly worried, whether that is HTS, constantly looking at how the West is reacting to them, how the BBC is reporting them, how the CNN is reporting them? They should stop being concerned.
But why is that, Sheikh? It's so clear. Even we're seeing some clips. If brothers have, let's say, people have, Shahada badge on their uniform and things like that, and there was this one British journalist there, and he's telling them, "Oh, do you know that represents this and that represents that?" And all of a sudden, the brothers take out the badges and stuff like this. I mean, why are we so affected by this? They just took out Bashar al-Assad. First of all, Sheikh, that's one thing, the effect of Western, what the West thinks kind of thing. Inferiority. And the second, do the rebels actually, do they realize that the West was behind Bashar al-Assad?
No, I think they are aware of this. I think that, look, I can't go into their minds in terms of knowing.
Understood. But I'm just looking at, and it's only been a week. They should be so proud of what they've done. Why are they concerned about what a British journalist thinks?
No, I understand that, but that's what I'm saying. I can't say what's in their particular minds, but what I can do is I can offer an understanding in terms of Muslims how we should view these things. We should be aware that the West is not concerned when it comes to something that's against their interest or is in favor of their interest, even if it means killing tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people. As we know, America was founded upon the ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Native Americans. In the same way, Australia was founded by the British, or when the British colonized it, it was colonized on the basis of the ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Aboriginal Australians. And same thing in regards to New Zealand, what happened there. So when it comes to the West, when they engage their actions, they don't care about how it's seen. They care about their interests. And we as Muslims have to be more concerned and more caring about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala thinks and gaining Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's support, rather than thinking implicitly or explicitly that the support and the success and that the way that this is going to create stability is if America is okay with us in terms of how we're operating. We need to be, I'm not saying we be foolish or we do stupid things like ISIS did, because that was completely un-Islamic. What I'm saying is that we need to have our confidence in our own deen and our own solutions, because at the end of the day, the West is the one that created the problem, not just of Syria, but of Zionism, of Jordan and what we're seeing there, of Iraq and the mess that we've seen there, of Libya and the mess that we saw there. They've created these problems, so they're not the ones that are going to fix and solve the problems within the Muslim world. I understand that Muslims want to create space so they can operate and develop, but that space and that creating that the ability to operate and develop needs to be fundamentally premised upon Islam, and it cannot be done if we seek alliances or we seek relations or we seek support from Western nations who created the very problems that we're facing today. So we need to be aware of this, and that's my message that I would give to the small community of Muslims who might hear this or understand this, is that those two principles, Islam is not an extra bit of, something nice that we have at the end of the journey. Islam has to be the fundamental guiding principle, whether it's in the individual life or the governance or the pathway for the Syrian revolutionaries as well. Has to be fundamental. And as we know, isn't it, we have this principle of ijtihad, the ability to derive rulings when there's new realities. So we have this ability to gain the guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on these particular incidents.
That's a good point. You said, look, we have the ability to do ijtihad, we have all the tools. Do you think that that's another problem, Sheikh, is that instead of looking at issues and saying, okay, what is the hukum shari'i, or what is let's say, how do we do ijtihad? The Muslims are not looking at it that way. It's everything is just pragmatism, right? I mean, look, we just have this now. We can't lose this. Let's work with what we have. Lesser of two evils. We're just so behind. What do you think that we can stand against such empires that we have today? Is this because of lack of understanding of the deen also, that and then on the top of that, where are the ulama in this right now as we speak, that should be saying that look, don't fall in the same trap again? It's funny that the ulama, fine, and alhamdulillah, the ulama are coming out and saying, mashallah, tabarakallah, congratulations, mabruk, this, that, and but I haven't seen yet actually an alim, seriously, other than maybe one or two really, who've already been saying this, but coming out and saying that, look, we see that there's a lot of forces that are trying to capitalize on this revolt. Make sure that you make any move that you make has to be according to the deen of Allah, so you don't fail.
Look, there's a lot to be said in regards to this. I think first thing, and I think you mentioned the point about should HTS and these resistance movements, these rebel factions, should they be the ones that take government? The reality is that the ones that should take government are the ones that understand how government works, understands how institutions work. Now, I understand that there is some practicality that is gained and experience that is gained by what HTS has done in Idlib and other areas. Yeah. But we're not just people who have to respond to events and gain experience. We've got a wealth of jurisprudence within our own Islamic library. Yeah, what we have for 1400 years of Islam in terms of governance, in terms of the fiqh of ruling, the economic system. We have this, we have established this. The problem is that we don't know what this is. Yeah. So, for example, people talk about justice. We need to establish justice. I've seen this mentioned
many times. Is being discussed. Justice, justice, justice. Nobody's just turning back and say, dude, yani, what can you define justice? And then, okay, even if somebody does define it, well, justice is don't put us in jails. Everybody has the right to say what they want. Everybody has a right, as you know, don't justice should not be that, okay, if your brother does something that because he knows you, he doesn't get put in jail, but my brother does. You see how they're defining justice. They're just saying that, look, just be fair, just be fair. There is no, even I saw Abdul Karim do this, unfortunately. Many times, Brother Bilal was on many shows and I was watching what he has to say. It's all about justice, 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 not Islam,
but this
Islam,
is
Islam.
My point. Yeah, but my point is this, Sheikh. In Islam, we have an institution called the Muhkamat Madhalim, or the Qadi Madhalim, which is the court of unjust acts. This is a judge who judges only the rulers. Any individual, any citizen of that society, of that state, is able to go to this judge if he believes his rights has been violated. This judge is independent and implements the Hukm Shara and has the ability to even remove the head of state from his office, even the Khalifa himself from his position. Or he can, ensure that the rights are being established. So now, look, we've got a situation where we got the Sharia, which is a fixed criteria. We've got an institution called the Qadi Madhalim, which is able to implement that, which then gives the rights of the people. It limits the role of the government. It limits his powers, and it's able to be accountable regards to this. This is just an issue
hold
of
on,
Qadi
okay,
Madhalim.
just hold on right there, Sheikh. So, yes, now you're talking about Mahkamat al-Madhalim here. Sheikh, this is a very good point. And the reason I stopped you just talk about it a little bit more. One of the things that we are seeing in discussion that's taking place in the Syrian theater here is that people are tired of seeing dictators in the Muslim lands. So sometimes when you talk about Islam and you say, okay, the Khalifa has lifetime, when he comes in power, it's lifetime. He stays there, unless he cannot take care of the ruling anymore, or he cannot rule anymore, or he's, he passes away, things like that. So some people look at that as, okay, that could turn into another dictatorship. And so that's a fear. But what you are mentioning is that, yes, he does have lifetime position. But there is an institution called Mahkamat al-Madhalim that actually takes him accountable, can remove him, or meaning can depose him, can... there's a lot that can happen. There is an institution that actually... Okay, go ahead. Talk about that a little bit more, Sheikh. Just so in people who fear, they're thinking, why do we need dictatorships again?
Yeah. So look, obviously we don't believe in dictatorships. We believe in accountable government. We believe in governments that are elected. And we believe in institutions. And the reason why I mentioned the Qadi Madhalim, because in Islam we have three types of judicial processes. We have the Qadi Madhalim, which is the judge that the judges that deals with any acts of oppression or irregularities that the government's doing. Any individual can appeal to that judge, or the judge can have independent powers to investigate if they believe a violation has potentially occurred. Then we have the regular judge, the Qadi Am, who deals with the general courts, marriage, divorce, crime, criminality, etc. You need to have a petitioner, you need to have a defendant, etc. And then you have the Qadi Hisba, the one who is like the street market judge who goes in to ensure that corruption isn't taking place within the marketplaces or the shops or the financial institutions, and they can impose fines and sanctions regards to people who seem to violate or engage in corruption. The reason why I mention this is because people are talking about justice and people are talking about accountability, but we have within our Islam a ready-made system that's already there, that's already established within the books of jurisprudence that explains the functions and the roles of the judiciary within Islam and the relationship the judiciary has with the ruler. We have that, and we also have 1300 years of this type of judicial system being implemented in the Muslim lands as well, and largely being successful in terms of that. Now, if we don't understand this, we don't understand the institutions, then where are we going to get our institutions from? Where are we going to get our thinking from in terms of the solutions to these types of problems? We end up outsourcing it to the West. We end up looking for similarities of what the America's doing in terms of their judicial system, or Britain's doing in terms of their judicial system, or the Britain in terms of their cabinet ministerial system in order to divide power. All of which are systems built upon an ideological framework which has a particular direction that gives society. Now, our direction we're trying to give society is Islam, and so the institutions that are derived from Islam directs the society to that Islam. Now, if you're trying to establish Islam and the justice of Islam through institutions which come from secular, liberal, capitalist culture, they're going to be a disharmony. And you're going to create further problems. And therefore, you're going to have to then outsource your thinking, your dependency. You become dependent upon the West in terms of trying to solve some of these issues. And then you give the ability to interfere. Or you end up sliding back into dictatorship. And therefore, one person rules and whatever he says goes. And nobody has the right to hold him to account. So this is what I'm saying. I'm saying that in order for people to talk about politics and governance and seek those positions of power, they must be prepared in terms of their thinking on these particular types of issues about what the institutions of the Islamic State are, of the government are. Now, even if you don't want to say we can declare Khilafah or not in Syria, irrespective, the fact is you still need institutions. This is the debate now. So what type of institutions? How does Islam deal with, for example, non-Muslim minorities like the Druze or the Christians or the Alawis? How are they going to deal with regards to that? Is it the case that they can hold positions of government ruling, or do they have another ability to hold, which in terms of the Majlis al-Ummah or the Shura committee? Can they be members of that? Can they be voted on that? And obviously Islam permits this, and Islam permits certain roles and responsibilities of the Shura when it can be binding upon the Khalifa and when it's recommended for the leader or the Khalifa or the ruler to adopt. The point being that even if they don't want to declare themselves Khilafah, for the whole entire Ummah, irrespective of that, the institutions are there, that thinking is already there, the jurisprudence is there. What is required is to understand and learn it, to implement it, so that we are letting Islam guide us as our principle, and not just something which is, Islamic governance is, maybe in the future we'll talk about that. No, that's your out, that's your solution there. So that's what I'm saying. The example of the Qadi Mudhalim is just an example to demonstrate the solution that Islam offers. And there's many solutions. So accountability is not just in the Qadi Mudhalim, it's also in the Majlis al-Ummah, which is another institution of the Islamic State. It is also amongst the groups and organizations that have the right to hold the ruler to account. And it's also upon the individuals also to hold the rulers to account, and the ulama as well. So this is important. Now, there's another question which I think you alluded to as well, which is where's the ulama in talking about these types of issues? Why aren't they leading on these issues? And the sad reality is that the ulama have not been taught these issues. They don't study these issues. There needs to be a situation now, I believe, is you may have the grounding for the ulama in terms of studying the fiqh, the Quran, some of the basic sciences, and then the specializations. As you know, Sheikh, there'll be specializations that scholars go through. There needs to be a department or specialization now on politics and on government. And this needs to be something that's instituted within traditional Islamic institutions, so that people who say, yes, I want to be a specialist in, Hanafi fiqh, He has that. But there has to be options now to say we need specialists now in governmental positions. Ahkam sultaniya, yeah, the rules of governance. We need this. Or nizam al-iqtisad, systems of economics. We need this now to become areas of specialization, so that scholars who come out are not just people who know the individual fiqh issues or know some of the tafsirat from an academic point of view or sirah from history, but actually understand politics and how Islam solves these issues. Because reality is, if you ask a scholar today, what are the 4 principles of government from an Islamic basis, most scholars won't know that sovereignty is with the Sharia, the authority is with the Ummah, the Khalifa or the ruler has the right to adopt when there's more than one opinion, and that and that they're held to account. So they don't know these issues, and because they don't know these particular issues, then you have this type of problem where scholars feel that it's not in their lane to talk about these issues. They're not trained politically to understand the political reality, the geopolitics,
Sheikh,
and they don't have the understanding of Islamic politics either, the rulings.
So, and these are many. Okay, so these are very important issues here. So you're saying that, look, the ulama now need to come and present the Islamic system to these revolutionaries. They need to come and talk about the court systems, remove the doubts that people have about Islam and Islamic systems. They need to, now is the time to educate the masses how Islam frees them from the colonial chains that they have been in for the last 100 years. So, Sheikh, I guess, can we blame Hayat Tahrir Sham or others for acting the way, I guess doing what they're doing, because they're thinking, unfortunately, even the ulama who have not been trained on these systems, they've been trained traditionally on hadith, on tafsir, and even the fiqh is not really there. It's just memorized. They cannot connect to the realities of today. If not, we would have seen them on the ground in Damascus and other places. So I guess for the movements on the ground who are making these changes, the only ones that are coming forward are either the past politicians or warlords or the Western politicians. Is this you see what I'm saying? Because they got to implement something. They got to go somewhere. They cannot be it cannot be instability in Syria. There cannot be. So I guess they're saying, okay, where do we go here? This is what we have.
Yeah.
Let's work with what we have. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, to a certain extent, but I think, obviously, I don't think it's the case that this isn't completely unknown to the Muslims. Yeah, the fact that I'm talking about, the fact we're talking about it, means that Muslims there are books written on this subject.
No, it's just that in all of the news that's coming out on the ground, from what we're hearing from the ground, from the podcast, for the the amount of podcasts that have been talking about this, I haven't seen actually even this discussion that now is the time of the role of the ulama right now. Except one time, I know Brother Bilal spoke about this in one of the podcasts. I was saying that, look, the ulama were missing then when the revolution began. The ulama are missing again. But from this perspective, that now is the time. Now is the time for the ulama to come forward and say, this is what needs to happen. I haven't seen that yet, unless there's some still we have. Obviously, we have a lot to see still on the ground in Syria. But again, I just want to emphasize that this is a very important point.
No, I understand. Yeah. So look, I think there are people out there that talk about these issues. It's not just isolated but it's not enough. That's the thing. In the same way, I don't think there's enough discussion taking place with regards to erasing the lines in the sand and creating a separate vision. If Syria is having problems in terms of stability, in terms of development and growth, then Syria needs to think about itself not in isolation to the rest of the region. It needs to think of itself as part of Jordan, part of Palestine, part of Egypt, because when we start thinking like this, and when the Syrians and the Muslim Ummah think, look, and I know people are going to think this is crazy talk, but the more you think about it, the more it makes sense.
Now, right now, crazy talks
Egypt,
make sense, Sakhi, just to let you know.
Yes, that's right. Egypt's at breaking point.
Yes.
Everybody in
Yeah.
Egypt
Yes.
are absolutely angry at the fact that Sisi is blocking the Rafah border.
Yes.
If
That's
there
true.
was a leadership, if there was a leadership they could get behind in Egypt, if the Egyptians could get behind a leadership, yeah, that would actually bring relief to the Muslims of Gaza, would they support it? I think they
Oh,
would
of course.
support it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Jordan,
I mean, they would.
the Jordanians are absolutely livid regards to what's happening, regards to their government using its airspace to shoot down Iranian missiles to protect the Zionist entity. They're not doing absolutely nothing in terms of protecting the Muslims of Palestine and Gaza. And remember, King Abdullah, King of Jordan, he's meant to be the custodian of Masjid al-Aqsa. That's his title. Yeah. And he's never done one thing.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that actually now the whole Ummah, the discussion is not about Syria, just in Syria, I should say. The whole Ummah looks at what happened in Syria and celebrating. They're celebrating. They're seeing this as a great victory. And I'm saying this is a potential opportunity for the Syrians to turn around and engage in certain moves and maneuvers in order to open up the borders of Syria and Jordan, to potentially open up potential avenues for an uprising in Egypt, to change the map of the region. Why do I keep saying change the map of the region? Because America wants to change the map of the region. The Zionist entity wants to change the map
they're
of
already
the
doing
region.
it.
And they're already doing it. And yet the Muslims who didn't decide their own map. This is the thing. If it was the Muslims that decided to draw this line between Syria and Jordan, yeah, or draw the line between Egypt and Sudan, maybe I could understand it being difficult. We didn't choose it. It was imposed by colonialists who occupied our lands, who had hatred for Islam and Muslims, who wanted to divide our lands to make us weak. They're the ones. So I'm saying we need to have this conversation out, not just amongst ourselves, but hopefully bigger, amongst the wider Ummah, that what's happened in Syria should not just stay in Syria, but rather be a discussion about redrawing the map of the region, because unity is where the support of the Ummah is going to get. Unity is where the strength of the Ummah is going to have. It's through that unity and through bi'idhnillah, by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the support of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's where we're going to get our support and our strength from. If we don't have that, we remain divided, then we're always going to be looking at, is it Russia that we need to align with? Is it China? Is it America? Is it the EU? You're 2 billion people. You shouldn't be aligning with anybody. Yeah, you don't need to. You have most of the world's oil and gas reserves. You have the strategic resources within the Muslim lands. You have, tens of millions in your armed forces. You have the geopolitical strategic region within the whole world. You don't need to rely upon anybody. What we do need to do is liberate ourselves and our mentality and our minds, and liberate our lands from the greater subjugation, which is Western colonial or neo-colonial policies. That's what we need to start discussing. And if we start having that conversation, whether that's in the streets of Syria or in Egypt or Amman or in the Saudi, etc., or in Pakistan or Bangladesh, that's when we will start to see real change. And yes, it's going to be difficult. Yes, there's going to be more problems that's going to affect Muslims, because the closer we operate according to the Islamic standard, the more threat we are going to be seeing according to the Western political elites in America and Britain and other countries, that they're going to see this as a threat against them, and they're going to try to do as much as they possibly can. And I was explaining this to a brother yesterday, in fact, on my podcast, which we haven't released yet. Hamza sorts this, who was on there. And I explained to him, because he said, look, this is going to cause potentially bloodshed. I said, we have witnessed 1 million people die in Iraq. We're witnessing hundreds of thousands of people who've died in Gaza. We have witnessed 600,000 people who died in Syria. We have witnessed the mess that's in Iraq after the invasion. We're witnessing the mess that's in Libya because of the colonialist and the neo-colonial policies of America and the EU, etc., funding different factions. We have seen this. We have seen Rohingya. We have seen, Turkmenistan, Xinjiang province, the Uyghur Muslims in China and what they're facing there. At what point are we going to start to say, hold on, we need to start thinking differently now, think outside of the box, think outside of the Western framework that's been imposed upon us, to keep us divided and disunited and weak. So this is what I'm saying. This is what we need to start doing now. And if we start to do that, and sometimes people say, well, you're just not pragmatic. At the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I gave this example yesterday as well. The Prophet ﷺ, just before he passed away from this life, he said to the companions, he said, send out the army of Usama and do not delay it. And when the Prophet ﷺ passed away, just before he passed away, Musaylim al-Khadhab, the liar, he rose. He came up, this false prophet. When the Prophet ﷺ left this world, we had the situation of people refusing to pay zakat. We had numerous other, 2-3 other false prophets that rose. We had people who apostatized from Islam, from the outlying tribes. When Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was made Khalifa, there was only 3 cities, Mecca, Medina and Ta'if, under the authority of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu wanted to send out the army of Osama, which had the majority of the Muslims armed forces being sent out, to where? To the Romans, to the greatest power at that time. Yeah. Sahaba were like, we are about to be attacked from multiple different people, and you want to fight the Romans? And Umar radiallahu anh even went to try to petition Abu Bakr radiallahu anh to not do this. But Abu Bakr radiallahu anh said, woe, O Umar, how can I go against the order from the order of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Because he understood it as revelation, not just a strategy. It's not like mubah issue. This was strategy. So this was revelation. This is hukm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He had to send it out. From a practical point of view, it makes no sense, because you're leaving Medina defenseless. Not only that, you're provoking a war with Romans. But guess what happened? The Romans, they were about to attack Medina because they had intelligence from the Arabian Peninsula that there was division amongst the Muslims because people had left Islam, and that there were false prophets. So they saw the Muslims at its weakest position. They thought that they could march upon Medina. So they were preparing an armed force against Medina to destroy Medina during the Khilafah of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. But when they heard about an army going from Medina to the Romans to fight them, to initiate fighting, they thought that the intelligence was false, was wrong. And they thought actually they are unified. And so they stopped and they went into a defensive position. Rather than launching an attack against Medina, they stopped their attack against Medina. Those rebel tribes, those apostate tribes who rebelled against the authority of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, were about to attack Medina. When they heard about an army leaving from Medina, they thought, hold on, they are not weak. We thought Medina was weak. They must have strength and support. So they halted, and that gave the time to Abu Bakr radiallahu anh to send out delegations and send out armed forces to different regions in order to subdue them or bring them back to Islam and therefore unify them. So in that one action from the revelation that was given to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, abided by Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, which from our limited mind, we couldn't see any potential outcome that would be positive. It doesn't seem pragmatic to us. It stopped the Romans from destroying Medina, and it also stopped the rebel apostate tribes from coming and destroying Medina as well. That one action. And there's many examples during the lifetime of the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or even the stories of the previous prophets, that where the pragmatic solution that goes against the hukm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not the real pragmatic solution. It's not the real practical solution. It was in fact the hukm of Allah. Yeah, it's like my little one. We're teaching him about Nuh alayhi salam, and the story about how his son, Nuh alayhi salam's son, he saw the 2 mountains, and when the flooding started, he thought he'd go to the 2 mountains. This would be my recourse. But what happened? He got drowned. Why? He should have stayed on the boat. But in his own limited mind, he thought the boat was not the place for security and safety. Yeah. So the ark of salvation for us is Islam and the implementation of Islam. And I'm saying for the Muslims is that we need to start thinking differently and think about a vision which redraws the map of the Muslim world away from the Sykes-Picot Agreement and the colonialists, what they draw, because that's where the strength and unity is. And in fact, that's where the hukm of Allah is in terms of this situation.
Actually, this is a very amazing point, Sheikh. Something I think And now I have a khutbah for this Jummah too. I was thinking, what khutbah should I give? I have, Jazakallah khair. That's why you sit with the ulama. Sheikh, I had a scholar tell me that when I was in Sham, and as you know, we were in and out of Sham constantly. I was talking to one of the scholars in Halab. At that time, Halab was still under, it was under the regime's situation. So he had told me that, look, the people who will stay on the ship of Nuh, he said, this revolution is a revolution, it's like the ship of Nuh alayhi salam. Whoever stays on it will be saved, and whoever gets off of it will be drowned. And so what you are saying is very interesting, that if the brothers, the revolutionaries or whoever, those people who have the mantle in their hand, they need to realize that this ship, you will drown the moment you get off the ship. The moment, Islam is the only way out, Sheikh.
It is.
It's the only way out, and they have to. And this is why, Sheikh, the ulama need to be reminding them. The ulama need to be talking to them. The real Muslim activists with clear understandings need to talk about this. Sheikh, now the other thing that I'm seeing is, of course, a lot of people are happy, and why shouldn't they be? I mean, a whole tyrant was crushed, and still, inshallah, will be taken accountable. But why do you not see in within the Muslim activists this discussion? Is it that they don't even know where to go from here now, except the discussion? Okay, Sham, Bashar has fallen. A new era has begun in the Muslim world, in the Middle East, in Sham. But none of what you are mentioning is being mentioned in the general Muslim activism, that we better be careful here, because if this is not done right, we can fall into another 100 years of darkness. I mean, what is the problem there with them? They're still just, okay, so because you have some activists who are still being very pragmatic. There's some activists who are just saying that, look, man, things have just happened, so hold your horses. Some are saying, what are they supposed to do? 13 years of bloodshed. Shouldn't they just try not to end it? Give them time. But no one is talking the way you're talking about how the system works and the hole that we can fall into.
Yeah, look, let me give you an example, just so. Do we think that the Kurds are going to unify under the idea of a nationalistic identity of Syria? This identity that was created by the French.
Of course not. They're not Syrians.
Right.
If you're going to look at it that way, they're not Syrians. Why should they come under Syria? I mean, that's a practical thing for them to do.
Because the nation state model, which is a Western concept, says that a nation is defined by a people, an ethnicity, a language, and a culture, and a shared history. The Kurds will say we have all of those things. So why do we not have our own state? I
mean, the Alawites are going to say something now. The Shia will come and say something now. Khalas, I mean, you're looking at 4 or 5 different states in Syria now.
So the issue is that, specifically with the Kurds, what unifies them with the Syrians, or the Arabs, I should say, is ultimately Islam. Yes. Majority of the Kurds are Muslim. Majority of them have any tendency and a love for Islam as well. Yes. So my local masjid, mosque, which is Kurdish mosque near me, is called Salahuddin al-Ayyubi Mosque. Because we know the most famous Kurdish Muslim in history is Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahimahullah, who liberated Palestine. So the thing is that, look, if you're going to present a call for unity, and you're trying to use a nation-state model borrowed from the West, you're not going to do it. And so this isn't just me dreaming about Islam. I'm saying that practically from a reality-based observation, if you're going to use a nationalistic concept a nationalistic idea like nationalism or nation-statehood, which is a secular idea, as a way to unify the different people, that's not going to unify them. What's going to unify them is a practical way of life, a worldview that's going to define to them how to understand rights, responsibilities, governments, which is built upon a fundamental idea of belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who knows us better than we know ourselves, who gives us better solutions than we can ever think of ourselves. So what you're saying to when you present this idea that we should unify based upon Islam, we're not just saying it from a nationalistic, like, you know, we're all, like Christians might talk about, we're all Christians, but they don't have any practical solutions from Christianity. No, we have practical solutions from Islam. That's why I mentioned about Qadim al-Dhalim. Is an institution that can help deal with accountability and corruption within the government. So you have Islam as a unifying factor that provides solutions that allows people to live together, even non-Muslims, because now non-Muslims understand what it means to live under an Islamic system, what rights and responsibilities they would have and they can have under the Islamic system. So I'm saying that, look, from a practical point of view,
Right. No,
it makes more sense.
Yeah.
Now, either you're going to give them Yani Islam, or you're going to give them some sort of warped version of capitalism or secularism, mixed in with a bit of Islam. That's never going to work.
Yeah.
And this is what I'm saying is that, look, you know, there's a confidence issue, there's a lack of knowledge issue, there is a, you know, we're still confined within the thinking of the frameworks that are imposed upon our minds. We think that we can only think in these boundaries, and we can't think beyond that. And if we think beyond that, we're denounced as crazy, lunatics, extremists, fundamentalists, etc. They do this, but we need to start saying, hold on, we've experimented with secularism in the Muslim world for 100 years now. We've had it imposed upon us. We had dictatorships of all different kinds. We've had experiments with some forms of democracy, etc. What's it given us? Well, Bashar Assad is the epitome of what it gave to the Muslim world. He is the very product of the colonial, neo-colonial secular order that was imposed upon us.
He's literally American product. His father was American product. He's literally, but placed by the Americans.
The sectarianism, that was created, was created under secular rule. Hundreds of years, Muslims lived and ruled with Islam, with Christians, Druze and Alawis, and other Jews and other sects. So we've had that experience. We know how to manage it. Islam has already dealt with it if it's applied. So this idea that, okay, you know, we're fearful for sectarianism if Islam is brought into the question. Well, what you brought already created the sectarianism and the division. And what you're bringing with Charles in terms of nation statehood and nationalism is only further going to divide, and is only further going to fracture Syria. So this is a reality. So what I would suggest to them is to think about presenting Islam in a confident way. In a way which is practical, in a way which is not, you know, not being apologetic for it, not apologizing. You know, we're Muslims, so of course we're going to have some sort of Islam. No, be assertive and be confident regards to this.
Sheikh, because of the Maghrib time here, we have to end it here.
No problem.
But this is amazing. I mean, we already have almost an hour 20 minutes. So I know this is amazing. Actually, what I'm going to do is this video, especially once it comes out, I'm going to send it to Syria to ask literally the people there to very seriously watch this. I wish I could convert this into Arabic also, what you're saying, because I mean, you really presented many practical ways that you know, the Muslims there, especially right now, should be looking at this thing, because I don't think I didn't have anybody so far. I mean, we did. People talk about many different aspects of what's happening in the region, but you gave some very practical steps of what needs to be done now as we speak in Syria, before we fall in another, you know, another lizard's hole, as the Prophet ﷺ said. So, Sheikh, first of all, Jazakallah khair. Let's.
This is just Sheikh, just really quickly. This is only a little bit. It's like we can only have so much.
Yes.
There's so much more to discuss in terms of this.
There is.
I want people
but they were very good and clear points that you have set up. Number one, on nationalism and sectarianism. It was very clear, because if you're going to go and blame and play games with the Kurds and say, oh, look, they want fitna and they want Kurdish state. Well, you want a Syrian state. So why are you, I don't understand the hypocrisy. So that's where it's going to go. Every time you're going to want a Syrian state belonging to Syrians, you're going to have a Kurdish state belonging to Kurdish. I mean, this is just common sense. And second, the issues of accountability, because people keep talking about justice, justice, justice. You clarified what justice is and what are the institutions in Islamic system that actually bring about justice. Actually, practically, not just talking about justice. And thirdly, breaking away from the chains of the Western colonialism. You practically put out the steps. You know, we can keep talking about, oh, do you want bloodshed, this, that. Well, we've been going through bloodshed for the last 100 years. You know, some numbers are out there that more than 22 million Muslims have been killed the last 100 years. So, I mean, that's what I'm saying. You really put together, but go ahead, Sheikh.
No, alhamdulillah, jazakallah khair. But like I said, there's so much more that can be said in terms of practical steps.
Yes.
The more details, and but for those who are listening, the details are there. Yeah, and you know they've been discussed. There are people who've written about it. There's books are written on this. There's more work that can also be done on this topic area. But the issue is like I said, my two guiding principles is one, Islam has to be front and center of everything that we do, particularly what's happening within Syria. And secondly, is that we cannot look to outsource our thinking and our dependency to the West, because the West do not have our interest at heart or Islam at heart.
I agree. And I think, Sheikh, on this, please, if you don't mind, if you can put together maybe 5 or 10 steps. If you are in, if you were to say, okay, you're saying this, can you present us a 10-step thing? What should be done right away now in Syria? If you have that, capacity, please put that together. Let's come back on the show and let's from here show a way forward, inshallah. Bismillah. All right, Shaykh, Jazakallah khair. May Allah accept it from you and us, and may Allah use us to guide this ummah and bring them back to the guidance that is guidance for humanity, Quran wa Sunnah. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa barakatuh.
لن يطول الظلام ديننا لن يضام نحن جيل الهمام نحن فينا عمر لا 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 لن يطول الظلام ديننا لن يضام نحن جيل الهمام نحن فينا عمر صبح بدا نور ظهر نجم وشمس وقمر ألقى على الدنيا الدرر هذا عمر هذا عمر كل البرايا تنتظر أيامه البيض الغرر كي تستفيد من العبر هذا عمر هذا عمر لا لن تدوم الجراح بل سيأتي الصباح نحن أهل الكفاح نحن فينا عمر لا لا لن تدوم الجراح بل سيأتي الصباح